Too many times we see buyers who don't know what they're doing buy something. And I know of one case here in Columbus, Georgia, where they paid $500,000 more than they could buy it because they bypassed the realtor. That's a lesson he doesn't know. He'll probably never know it, but I know for a fact he could have bought it for $500,000.
And we're back on the MHP Exchange Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Rizzo. Joining me, my co-host, all in gray and black, these dark colors, which is like a new Eric Busuttil. How are you doing this morning, Eric?
I'm doing good today, Frank.
Good. Just good. I like
good.
it. Just good. Today on the MHP Exchange Podcast, we have a great program, really a great guest, and who's got a world of experience in the space, going back 50 years, which will be super enlightening, and I'm really glad to have him here. But before we get started, if you are listening to this program, I'm asking you to go to iTunes or Spotify, rate the program, right? Give us a rating. That helps for us, and your comments are always appreciated. And the MHP Exchange Podcast, brought to you by the MHPExchange.com, which is the largest source of opportunity, news, education, and entertainment. And of course, Chat MHP, the industry's first personalized AI assistant to help you in all your mobile home park questions and mobile home park needs. So check that out at the MHPExchange.com. But now with all that out of the way, Eric, I'm really glad we were able to get this guest to come in. This is somebody who I've had a relationship with probably for about 6-7 years, and we've run across different deals throughout the years. His name is Dave Jackson. He is from NAIG2. He's based in Columbus, Georgia. Dave has been a broker for 15 years. He's been in the industry for over 50 years. So when we talk about how much change has happened in this industry, how many things have occurred, especially over the last few years, Dave has a really good vantage point of seeing what this industry was and where it is now, and some of the steps it's taken to get there. So I'm super excited to have Dave on board.
Absolutely.
So without further ado, we're going to welcome Dave Jackson to the program. Dave, you got to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Am I there now?
You are here now.
You are
You know,
here.
I'm a dumb cracker. I can't operate no machinery.
How are we doing this fine morning, Dave?
I'm doing good. Got my coffee. I'm ready to go.
Well, we appreciate you joining us today, and being part of the program, especially having somebody who has so much experience and knowledge in the space. And we were just talking about briefly, I think we go back probably about 7 years. You and I have probably gone back and forth on different different opportunities that might have popped up. And that's, kind of, you've enlightened me on a lot of things, but why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us, everybody, a little bit about your background and how you got started in the space.
That could be a long story. Grew up in Ocala, Florida. Used to be the second largest manufacturing area in the country for what were then called mobile homes. The first job I had was working in a lumberyard and a hardware store at 13, and everything was electric then. So they would break tools and bring them in, and we'd rebuild them. So been working with the industry since then. In between colleges, I ran a machine that made the siding, the metal siding that went on them. So I go back into pre-1970 with these things, pre-HUD homes. My first actual home that I bought was a 12 by 64 Skyline 5th Avenue, top of the line, avocado appliances and avocado shag carpet. It was quite the home. And somebody is still living in that home today.
Wow.
From 1970. It's in a park in Tampa, and I went by there last year, and it's still there. Looks good, too. They got it painted fire truck red now. So these things last longer than people think. Most of my background's in building materials through the years. Stayed connected with the industry. I've owned communities as big as 170 pads, both in Georgia and Alabama. I love these things. They were originally affordable housing. They still are. We've seen an evolution of who lives in them, but they're still the best thing going out there for affordable housing.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's just such an overlooked solution because you can't build a traditional built house for the same cost that you could build a really high quality mobile home. But, Eric talks about this a lot on this program, that if you maintain these homes, they could last you over 50 years. And you mentioned that the home that you first bought, right, is now 54 years old, right? And it's still, operation. And the quality of the home is so much better now, right? But, what would you say is the key to that, like to maintaining that home for that time? Or because if you're a community owner and now you buying a park with obviously homes in it, like what are some of the tips that you would say, this is what you have to look at, this is what's going to maintain the home and the integrity of the home over the life cycle of your ownership?
Well, I think it's understanding that it's a frame home. It's a wood frame home. If you went out and built a new wood frame home, how long would they last? I always use the example of Mount Vernon, George Washington's home. Even though it looks like blocks, it's actually a wood frame home with wood siding on it. That thing's what, 350 years old. You go to Europe, they're older than that, and they're wood homes. So it's maintaining them, taking care of them. The parks I bought, if you run into even a privately owned home that looks like garbage, a coat of paint makes all the difference in the world, metal or wood or masonite even. You're just taking care of and maintaining.
I think the key, Frank, to keeping these homes in good condition is educating the owner of the home, right?
Yep.
And letting them know what they need to do in order to maintain that home. Because it's these little tiny issues that become big issues. And as long as they, tackle them when they're a tiny issue, a leak under the sink that, drips for a month and, gets under the wood. I mean, you're talking into a big problem, but I mean, that's the key. Is you got to educate the end user, and you need to monitor that home, even if you don't own it, and kind of keep an eye on it, talk to the community. We have a relationship manager, as you know, in our team that follows up with buyers and speaks to them regularly for a couple weeks or a couple months after they purchased a home, just to kind of ask them, hey, how's it going with the home? Have you had any issues? Make sure you're looking out for this, make sure you're looking out for that. And we do that with people for several months. I mean, sometimes they get annoyed with us for that, and they even stop calling us, but it's they stop answering our calls, but we're really doing it to kind of help them. And if you get it into their heads, over the first 6 months, and they catch on to it, that home could last forever.
That's a great point. So Dave, now you're working in the industry from the building side of it, and then you decide to make that pivot before you become a broker. You decide at some point, I bought a home, I'm working in there, I'm working in the machine shop, I'm building these homes, I buy a home. How do you make that jump from there to investor?
That's a long story. As an investor, I started buying, like most people, single family homes. And my wife found online a used book called Deals on Wheels by Lonnie Scruggs. And I read it. There's a phone number in the back, and I finished it on a Saturday morning. It was an easy read, and I called the phone number and thinking it would be an office somewhere, and some guy answers the phone and asking me questions. And 2 hours later, figured out it was Lonnie Scruggs. So we became friends, and he's a real mentor to a lot of people. Met Ernest too down in Florida, who's kind of the godfather of turning old parks around. So I was very fortunate to fall in with the guys that really knew what they were doing and learned the industry. The first park I found, I was like a dog chasing a car. All of a sudden I've got it.
So
The car stops, and I turned around and looked around and go, okay, I don't know how to do this. And I found somebody that could help me do it.
So before you go on that, because you mentioned Lonnie Scruggs, and we've talked about this, the term Lonnie dealer actually comes from Lonnie Scruggs.
Right.
So for anybody who's listening, point of reference, Dave, you started in this business. I mean, you started literally with the people who helped build this industry.
Very fortunate. And that book's free online. If you type in Deals on Wheels free, 10 copies will come up. It's older copies, but the principles are the same. And my first home, I had the book, I read the book, did everything wrong and still made money. So it's like drugs. Once you do it, you're hooked.
It is pretty addicting, the business.
Absolutely. Because once you do it, you either do it and love it, or you hate it and you want a way out. But what was that aha moment for you, Dave, where you're like, wow, this is where I need to focus my time and attention?
I found out I owned about 5 businesses in Cordele, Georgia at that time. One of them was a lumber yard. So I did this first home, and again, did everything wrong and still made money. And I said, well, gee, that's almost a no-brainer. But I went out and sought people that could help me do it right. I wasn't out there trying to reinvent the wheel. That's a problem. I see a lot of people jump in this thinking, they've watched HGTV for 30 minutes and think they know everything there is. And it doesn't work that way. You got to find people that'll mentor you and help you. And again, I was very fortunate to find the good guys.
And I will say, for those of you that are listening, and if you happen to see Dave Jackson, I will tell you, Dave does that in paying it forward, because him and I have spent a lot of time talking, and it was even on things that didn't work out between us, or it was just conversations on different deals and takes on the market. And so, Dave, you are a testament to that, because I see you've done it with me, and I'm sure if you've done it with me, you've done it with a host of other people that could say, hey, I've called Dave for questions or advice or questions about the marketplace. And he's always been there to pick up the phone and have those conversations, unless it's after 7:30, right?
I have to turn my phone off at night. We deal with people from all over the world, and we're a pure commercial company. And man, that phone would ring all night if I didn't turn it off. But I do call back. And the advice is worth everything you pay for it. You didn't pay me a penny for it, so it's worth nothing. Yeah, I think that's an obligation. Those of us in the industry, you're in the industry, I'm sure you coach some people. Again, I had really good guys, never charged me a penny, didn't cost me a thing. Early when I started investing, I said there's 2 ways to do this. And I took a lot of seminars and paid a lot of money, because you can pay the money or you can make the mistakes and pay the money. I figured it was easier to go sit in a class than it was figure out how to solve a problem. And there are some good people out there teaching.
So what are some of the biggest changes? Because you kind of hit on, there's new people coming in and maybe they watched an HGTV show, or they think that the business is easy and they want to dip their toe in. Like, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in your 50 years experience or career in the space?
The evolution of the buyer of the home has changed. In my case, young, married, wanted a nice place to live, moved into a brand new park. In fact, that park in Ocala has a Sheraton sitting on it. That tells you it was a pretty nice area. So it was a way to get a lot of square footage, privacy, nice home, very affordably. That's a big word for a cracker. What has evolved is you see not just newlyweds and lower income people buying homes. It kind of evolved into 3 groups. That group still buys homes. You've got the people that moving up from apartments will buy a home. Again, they've got a yard. The kids aren't playing in the parking lot. You'll see people retiring, or people that aren't as concerned about living in a certain neighborhood that do that. The Villages down in Florida, everybody knows the Villages, big retirement community, started as a mobile home park. They've still got manufacturers housing in their area. They just built a new community last year. So, I mean, they know where they came from. They're still building, thousands of houses, but they still got communities inside there. So the buyer has evolved into a wide spectrum of buyers of the homes. I think buyers of the communities, it's a very good cash flow business. Let's be honest about that. It can also cost you a lot of money if you don't know what you're doing. You are the mayor of that town. You own the infrastructure. If it's a park it's probably part tenant-owned homes, part park-owned homes. Everybody's looking for that perfect park. You can spot seminar buyers, people that have been to the classes. They're looking for all public utilities. All the homes are tenant-owned. The streets are paved with gold. Everybody mows their own grass. They're looking for that perfect park. Do they exist? They exist, but you're going to pay through the nose for them.
Or you have to make them that perfect park.
Or make them. And that was my point. I've always bought the underperforming parks and turn them around. Is it work? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But you can do it. And again, I come out of the industry, the building material industry, and so I know that side really well, and I know the trades really well. If you do it wrong, it costs a lot of money. If you do it right, it may still cost a lot of money, but it's not as expensive as learning on the job. So we're seeing from that side, buyers of communities. We see guys like you that understand what they're doing. You've been through the ditches a few times. You probably made some mistakes you regret. You're still in it. You survived. We see people with no background in the industry or building or anything else. Saw the original Forbes and Business Week articles, saw Berkshire Hathaway start buying communities and buying the industry. They decided to get in it. It's like stock. Your neighbor bought the stock. You're out there buying that stock. The problem then becomes, if you're at a distance, you better know how to manage that. What do you want to do? Start calling realtors and say, hey, can you imagine manage a manufactured home community? 90% of them are going to tell you yes. And probably 89 of that 90 have never darkened the door of a home. So I'll speak for realtors now, since I are one, finding somebody that understands the industry, and we're very fortunate in the Southeast. You probably know 6 people in the Southeast that really do this well. I could probably name those 6 people. I hate to name my competitors, so we'll leave that alone. As realtors, we know each other. We can call each other. We can trade information with each other. That lets us do what we do better. And again, if we don't bring value, you really don't need a realtor. But too many times we see buyers who don't know what they're doing buy something. And I know of one case here in Columbus, Georgia, where they paid $500,000 more than they could buy it because they bypassed the realtor. That's a lesson he doesn't know. He'll probably never know it, but I know for a fact he could have bought it for $500,000.
So what would be the biggest thing that you think a lot of these new investors in the space miss, right? Because we talk about that a lot. What do you think is the biggest thing that somebody coming into the space, maybe they read the books or saw an article or heard something about it. Now they come in here and they want to buy a park. What do you think the top thing they miss going into that park?
Other than understanding how a community works, probably management. Part 2 is the cost of rehabbing homes. Somebody that understands what they do with these can walk through a home in 10 minutes and get a pretty good idea what it's going to cost to rehab it to neat, clean, tidy, safe level. Somebody would want to live in. From my perspective, I like homes to be the best thing for the buck that people can buy or rent, because I do both. So I think somebody coming in new that doesn't understand construction, that doesn't understand how they're going to manage it, it's not giving them a card to go to Walmart to make the payment and thinking they're going to do it. It just doesn't work. It's part of the program of managing. I'm figuring how you're going to get paid, but there's still a management part of it that they just totally miss. Are they better hiring professional management? If it's a big enough community, that there's some really good managers out there, national people that do it really well. Somebody like you that's got multiple parks, you address the management issue and probably do it yourself. You've got in-house management, understands it. You have people on the ground that understand what they're doing, and you can direct those people. So that's probably the biggest problem, other than overpaying. Because again, you're in it. The price of communities has gone up fairly drastically the last few years.
What I see, Frank, and Dave, is that, obviously if you're buying a community that's stabilized in a lot better condition than I would say some of the communities that we typically buy, you could probably hire, someone who's just there to manage the park and get away with it, right? As long as you're maintaining the homes. But when you're buying a community like you said that you like, or we like, a park that is, needs a turnaround or a heavy lift, it's not just a manager. It's a manager who can manage not just the tenants and, deal with evictions and payments, but someone who could deal with, oversight of renovating these homes, right? They also have to deal with that. They have to know, how not to spend a ton of money on infrastructure when issues arise. So it's not just managing the property, it's managing the individuals there. It's helping them, change the culture in the community. There's just so many hats that a manager takes on. It's not just if you say the word property manager to most people in real estate, it's someone who's in the office, fills out the application, shows the units, collects the payments, send the notices. In a property like the ones that we buy, there are, that list of things that they need to do is just so much more. And you can't really get that unless it's someone who understands, how, manufactured housing community works. We've had great success in using individuals that either lived in the community already, has had some management experience and understands just the intricacies of mobile home parks in general. And we have to train them and teach them what we want and how we like to do things and, kind of mesh with their personalities. But that is what I think the buyer misses, right? If you're a first time buyer, I don't think they fully get that, such as we did that as well on our first community. It was 17 hours away. It was a small community. We hired a real estate team, and inside of 6 months, it was just, all right, this is over, not going to work. And we had to take it into our own hands.
So I think to elaborate on your point, Ian, and what Dave said too, is it goes back to how these communities were originally built, right? Inside the cities or the towns, there was that owner operator that was there on site, and the community itself became its own ecosystem. And people were, if they lived there, if the resident put their home there, which is the largest asset they owned on your land, there was this emotional attachment that if I knew the owner and I had that attachment, I would live with maybe situations that we would look at and say, hey, that's substandard. Those roads aren't done right. They haven't been making the investment in that community, but the resident has an attachment to that community that you do not find in multifamily housing and commercial. You just don't find it anywhere else. And you have to be able to maintain that emotional attachment with the resident while also operating the park, which goes back to what you said before. If someone buys a home where you touch them, like, how's everything inside the home? Are you checking this? The windows are there. Are you caulking and sealing those windows? Those little things create that bond inside that community. And while it's supposed to be quote unquote passive, you still got to touch them. Like, you have to have that touch and feel. And I think for a lot of cases, some of the new people walking in the space, they lose that. They forget that because they look at it as a spreadsheet and a data point, and they say, if I do X, I should get Y. You need to have the data, right? But it's not run on data. You have to have that human element, which I think is one of the reasons why we love it so much, because there is that human element to the space. But Dave, you now made that transition from owner operator, right? And now you became a broker where you're sharing your knowledge with other people. And you've been a broker for 15 years, obviously bringing that wealth of knowledge to that. How do you see the market today?
I think, again, it's like everything else in real estate. Let me go back to what you said a second ago, and then I'll come back to this. Initially, most parks were owner operators, mom and pops, as we like to call them. We are seeing the end of the mom and pop era, to me. We're seeing less and less that are that and more that are institutional owned. So that transition you were just alluding to is something that is happening. The mom and pops, it was personal to. The people in the community knew them. Your third cousin over here, you knew everybody in the community. You knew who the problems were. The institutional buyer, the larger buyers, don't do that. They lose that personal touch you were talking about. And I think that's critical to running parks and communities that are smaller. It takes 75 to 100 pads to afford decent management. And it takes investing that money in the management, like y'all were alluding to. They need to know what they're doing, or else you've got to train them to know what they're doing. And the ones that know what they're doing, it's very easy for them to move if they're unhappy with who they're working for. They're going to pick up the phone and call me or you and say, who's looking for a decent manager? And we could probably put every one of them somewhere in 10 minutes. I mean, it's that kind of thing. What was the question I didn't answer?
So I'm used to this, right? This is like an Eric Busuttil tactic where you ask him a question and he pivots on something else, which is great. You've seen the market change in the last 15 years. How do you see the market today? What are you seeing today in the market?
I'm seeing an interesting trend. It used to be, there were like three groups of buyers. The guy buying it's like any investor, a guy buying his first park, it might be 8, 10, 4 pads. I even had one that was 3 pads. So you had that new buyer. If he had some money, he might be buying something 50 pads. You saw that middle guy that bought up to like 200 pads, 250. And then you saw the institutional buyer that would go in and buy 500, 1,000 pad communities. I actually lived in a senior community in Florida that had 1,200 homes in it. Got some golf courses and tennis courts and woodworking shops. That's almost always professionally managed, employees on the ground, well done. Person that owns it may never have been to that community. So that's kind of where it evolved. But with the institutional buyers running out of those larger parks, they're starting to buy smaller parks and cluster them. You'll see somebody that owns a half dozen parks in a geographic area, 30 minutes apart. And the idea is if you've got to go get something at the supply store, the Home Depot or something, and that's an evolution in the homes too. They used to be all kinds of weird sizes of windows and doors, and everything else was a weird size. So you had to buy from manufactured home supplier. That's evolved to where you can go to Lowe's and buy residential stuff and it fits. I'm seeing institutional buyers start buying the next level down, but they're clustering several communities together. They can centralize their management. They can centralize their maintenance. All that is helping them keep the pad count where they want it, 500,000 pads, whatever, and yet not all be on the same piece of land. And I'm seeing that at the top 2 levels. Since the pressure is coming down from the big buyers, the middle-sized buyers are looking more at doing the same thing with smaller parks. So that's probably the biggest change that I've seen over the last few years. That and chattel lending's come back, where somebody can buy a home and move it into a community. That's the other thing that we've seen a real big change. 2008 stopped chattel lending. It's back.
Hey, Dave, I believe we're looking to buy some communities around about where you are. Are you looking to manage anything?
I'm not above it. I manage some now, but I manage a manager. And y'all can probably do that as well as I do.
That's a great point.
I've got some I manage, and the problem's not those people in getting it done right. The problem is the owner who's never owned a community before is out there thinking he's smarter than everybody else, and
Right.
He might be, but he's sure spending a lot of money that he didn't need to spend.
So we definitely in the beginning especially, we definitely learned a lot from our managers.
Correct. So Dave, if anybody has any questions that's listening to this program, and I know you concentrate in the Southeast, but if anybody has any questions or is looking for, maybe an investment opportunity in a park, how could they reach out to you?
My email is Dave, Dave, Jackson, CRE @gmail.com. And I do answer those, as you know. My phone number is 706-587-8660. That is my cell number. And as Frank said, if it's after 7 or 8 at night, leave me a message and I'll call you back. My wife makes me turn it off.
But he always calls back. I will
Always
say
call back.
always calls back.
We deal. I don't charge for coaching. I look at a lot of stuff I have nothing to do with, and again, give them my opinion. I don't care if they use it or not. It's just my opinion. I just need to pay it, as you said, pay it forward. A lot of people helped me early on, and I need to pay that back.
That's a great concept, Dave. We believe in that as well. And that's basically why we do this as well.
Correct.
So thank you very much. You are awesome, Dave.
Thank you very much for appearing on the program. Again, if you liked this program, give us a like or a comment on iTunes or Spotify. You can listen to this program at the mhpexchange.com, which features opportunities. We have listings across the country there. So, Dave, if you have a park that you're looking to list, you could list it on the MHP Exchange.
Thank you.
Right? You have educational content. You have news from across the country, anything that's happening in the MHP space. And we have entertainment. Obviously, you can watch this program there. You can also check out our program, Trailer Park Turnaround, which is a video log of what we do when we get on the ground. So if you have any questions, give us a call or send an email to the MHP Exchange. Dave Jackson, pleasure to have you on. Thank you very much. And
I
thank you
appreciate
for
it. Y'all
the
have a
years
good day.
of what you've done and the insight that you've given us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Have a great day, Dave.
Thank you.